Well, welcome everybody to geohug, and I'm so excited. We're here for part two, and I'm very thrilled that we have Guy Desharnais with us today. So Guy brings over 2 decades of experience in geology and mining as a role as Vice President of Project Evaluation at OR Royalties. He's worked across exploration, geomet, resource estimation, and economic evaluation. And Guy was a key member of teams that won international challenges that used innovative approaches to unlock opportunities and de-risking in exploration and resource estimation. So it's going to be brilliant tuning in today for part two of the Parker Challenge, lessons in gold deposit estimation and classification. So thank you so much, Guy, for joining. It's awesome having you here.
Thank you, Jess. Thanks for hosting us a couple times a week. We really enjoyed it. It's really important that we have these discussions. So thank you.
It's awesome. I was saying just before how cool it is doing a two-part series. So it's thank you for doing it with me. I'm very excited to get more stuck into it. But before we do start, I was really curious what got you into mining and geology to begin with.
Oh, yeah, I was giggling to myself when you asked this to Lucy. My story is not nearly as inspiring. I grew up in the flattest, most boring prairies of Canada, and I probably didn't see a rock till I was 10 years old. That's only a slight exaggeration. But I went to university. I wanted to be a scientist, and I went into physics, and I wasn't mathy enough to get through the courses there. So I went to an easier department, environmental sciences, and then I had to take a geology course, and I met the crew there, and I remember thinking like, oh, these guys are super cool, and then thinking like, there's summer jobs involved with this, and seemed all very exciting. So I quickly changed departments, and the rest is history, I guess.
That is epic. And you have been like everywhere. Like you've had an awesome opportunity to like look at all sorts of projects, traveling a lot. I'm curious what some major highlights are for you.
Uh, wow. I have had the opportunity to travel in a lot of cool places. I would say probably Mongolia was the most foreign. The people are just so kind. The landscapes are otherworldly. And like there was nothing more exotic for me at that time. So yeah, Mongolia was a treat. I only got to go there for a couple of weeks and drove around in buggies for all that time. And yeah, looking forward to maybe working out there another time.
That would have been really cool. I really want to go to Mongolia at one point. It'd be an experience, that's for sure. It'd be awesome. And I'm very excited for this part. I did get a little teaser earlier. Uh, Pet rocks, what have you got for us?
So I cheated a little bit. I have a display case in front of our office, and we invested in a company called Renard or Stornoway Diamonds, and they I don't know if it was because they had difficulty in paying us and with the diamond stream that we owned there, but we eventually got gifted a diamond. This is a 5 carat diamond stuck in the kimberlite. This is very unusual because usually the diamonds want to get unstuck from the rock, and in almost all rocks they get unstuck, and the diamonds are just like on their own. But they had several examples of this where it goes through the diamond sorter uh, to catch the really big diamonds, and they have several examples of this sticky kind of kimberlite which got stuck to the diamonds. So I was super amazed to see this sample, and I stole it for a week. I have to unfortunately bring it back, but
You can't keep that one, unfortunately.
no, no, too many people know about it. They'll
Yeah,
miss it.
it's on YouTube now. Yeah, you can never
Yeah,
keep
exactly. Yeah.
it. That is awesome. Well, yeah, thank you so much for being here today, and yeah, for you and Lucy doing this two-parter with me. If you want to share your screen, and yeah, we'll get stuck into it.
So this the quote on the bottom here is a famous Parker quote. You can't kill yourself with a pogo stick. And the thinking I think behind that was in discussions about applying different methods to a problem. Oftentimes, a very simple method is sufficient. And applying a very complex solution, there's no added benefit in some cases, and then you have a bit bigger chance of hurting yourself in this case. the example of a pogo stick is hard to is a way to get to the root of the problem without hurting yourself. So the comments that I'm making are my own, not those of my company. And just to thank everyone again, obviously the AusIMM, Barrick, Sequent, and our employers, and of course Lucy Potter. It's fun to do this kind of challenge, but it's even more fun to do it with your best friend. Uh, this was a fun multiple weekend event for us to try to get through this and a crunch right at the end. So looking forward to the next opportunity to do this kind of activity. So here, before we get into the nuts and bolts, I wanted to share some tricks that I use when I'm evaluating projects. So every day I'm looking at something new and trying to figure out, is this going to be a good project? Is it going to be something that's difficult? How risky it is? And this is the process that I do when I first grab onto a new project. So initially, I'll take the raw data and I'll create mineralized intervals. So it's a simplification of the assay, so it's more clear to see the root of what's important. And then I'll choose one of those intervals that best represents the style of deposit. I'll run 60, and if you want to know sort of the process, you can look at Lucy's talk from last week. And then I'll stroll around, I'll look in 3D, I'll cut sections, I'll rotate, I'll add the geology, remove the geology, look at the assays, to really get an impression of the habit of the mineralization. And I started describing the types of deposit, the very easy things as a big potato. And then I'm like, well, maybe I can stretch that potato analogy to the whole sequence of different styles of mineralization and how hard they are to deal with. So the most easy, in my opinion, is something like a baked potato. So these are porphyry deposits or intrusion-related deposits where if you have 30 well-placed holes, you've pretty much defined the geometry of the deposit, and then you're dealing with the internal variability of the grade within. But usually there's a minority of assays within that are going to be well below cutoff, and it's a much easier problem to deal with in terms of classification and estimation. Add a layer of complexity, we have potato slabs. So these are your thick vein deposits or VMS deposits or things that are tabular in shape. And then we can subdivide these already into two, where one within the geology, within the strike or the body, almost all of the assays are above cutoff grade. And another scenario where you have a majority of the material that's within that slab is below cutoff grade. And now you have a much riskier situation. And this is what we live in usually in orogenic or epithermal gold deposits, where you need to figure out a geometry within the geometry to assess the risk and the economic potential of these bodies. Now we get to French fries. So if you get a big pile of French fries and they're densely packed enough, then you have something like a stock work where you have so many veins that essentially you can consider bulk mining this, and you just accept the waste as part of doing business. But for those of you that have worked in diamond exploration or other deposits that are pipe shaped, these are the worst. They're super hard to drill off because if it's a kimberlite, usually they're vertical and you can sit on the top of it if you're lucky, and then drill out towards the edges and find the edges of these things. But if this is sitting 500 meters down and it's a cylinder, that's a huge pain to try to drill and find the edges and define that volume very, very closely. I guess I asked Jess before if curly fries were popular in Australia. She said, nah, I'm not sure. Anyway, so with curly fries are maybe a Canadian thing or a North American thing, but essentially they're a French fry in a spiral shape, and I liken these to folded iron formations. So the iron deposits in Labrador are generally these very high grade but tightly and complexly folded structures. So if you drill through one of these mineralized bodies, you're basically above cutoff grade always, and you need a certain amount of drilling to figure out what's the geometry. So this is truly a geometry problem, not a geochemistry or a grade risk problem. And the worst is the hash brown. So this is a scenario where, and not that common, but occasionally we see these projects where there's gold everywhere, but nowhere at the same time. So you'll have drill holes that have little bits here and there, and when you try to assemble them together, it's super hard to put together. And the joke here is you better call Jess because we're going to need way more core boxes to get to know what this deposit actually looks like. So I'll stop here for a second. We'll just go to the project. So this is the software that I use. It's called Genesis. It's basically from the consulting firm where I learned the trade of resource estimation. So if we just go to plan, so this is the project that we did the Parker Challenge. So this data was released to all of the 200 participants that signed up. And here I've already simplified the data to mineralized intervals. So if you want to know like how we get to this stage, which things look really clear and easy to understand, then you need to go back to Lucy's talk from last week. But clearly we can see a few things here. We have a French fry here, a very high grade core, which is cylindrical. And if you're worried like, oh, maybe that's just because of the drilling. No, there's drilling all around it, but only the part of it that's mineralized is visible. And then we have a separate structure that's looks more like a slab. So you have here, I'll just widen the window a little bit. Looks more like one of these slabs, but it's folded. So we have to respect the geometry when we're doing our estimation. And already, just for this quick review, we've already identified that it looks like fairly straightforward geometry. We have maybe 6 or 7 different pieces that we're going to need to model. But the difficult part often is looking at the exception. So it looks, if you look in this section here, there's no colored cylinders which are mineralized. You just have these holes which are blank. And then we have to go drill hole by drill hole to figure out what are we going to do across this gap of grade. And it's very low grade, it's like 0.1 or something. So do you force across the ore deposit model through here, or do you just gap it and make a hole in your solid? So that's often the part that takes the most time. And just with that quick review, we're able to figure out what we're going to deal with and budget your time and figure out to make sure you're able to deliver on time. So this was honestly a very cool data set that the AusIMM provided. There's a Barrick project, Carlin style gold deposit that I would say the gold variability was relatively well behaved. Capping was barely necessary, especially after we made the domains. And again, go see Lucy's talk to see how we created our domains. But one thing we needed to do is respect the geometry and the trends within the deposit. So we did a couple things here. The first thing is within the Genesis software, we have a tool that's similar to dynamic anisotropy. There's a similar tool in Leapfrog as well. Essentially, you assign a dip, a strike, and a spin to every single block within the block model. And that we used quite a manual method to do that. Basically, in 3D, draw polylines along the trends we wanted to respect. Some of those trends are obvious, and others we sort of try to discover and iteratively try to improve with time. And one of the tools within the software, again, Genesis, is an auto variance search. So this requires you to first estimate the resources. So the blocks already have a grade. And then you have an automatic search with an ellipsoid of a defined diameter. And it's actually looking for the least variance within the block model. So it's looking at all the blocks around it and trying to see which one is its closest family members. And then it says, oh, this is the direction of all my friends that are similar to me. And then it applies that direction to the blocks around it. And these are 2 different results from that. So the 160 foot is one search. The database was in imperial metric, so you'll see me switch back and forth between feet and meters. But here you see that it's trying to it's a bit fuzzy and distorted in the blocks. And then if you use a much larger diameter search for the variance, then you get things kind of comb out. So we didn't use this directly. We kind of played around with this and did a bunch of iterations to see what we did. And then eventually we just manually forced what we really thought was the best trends within the data. And additional to that, so that's just the orientation of the ellipsoid. And you can see this is one of the slab, the folded slab domains that we created. And you can see each one of these circles is actually an ellipsoid, and the color changes depending on its dip. So then each little block or each part of this ore solid has its own orientation. We also we applied another technique, which is not very commonly used. It's called localized anisotropic kriging, LAK. So this is very similar to ordinary kriging. The only real difference is you provide a template variogram. In our case, we created 3 separate variograms because we had 3 different enough geologies or orientations that we wanted to respect. And then within each one of those, within each block, which already has its orientation that you've provided for the search ellipsoid. In some cases, they're flat pancakes, and in other cases, they're cigar shaped for the French fry shaped deposits. The variogram now also follows the trend. So you need to make a leap in assumption here that the variography or the variance changes along the trend, but we convince ourselves by looking at the deposit and how these deposits, the Carling style deposits, form, that this makes sense, that we should be following, and that variance will shift around the bends of these deposits. But now one of the most important steps, and I think underappreciated, is the classification. So now we want to filter out the fuzzy blocks that have less good information and really concentrate on the blocks that we can rely upon. So in the Parker Challenge, we had, in the end, the AusIMM had around 20 different qualified or participants that provided enough the report and the block model and everything they needed to be qualified. And these are the resulting classifications. I'll just point out that there's 2 versions of this histogram that are available, and this was provided by Danny Cantwell from SRK, who was part of the AusIMM committee. This one is classified, or it's limited to 0.2 gram per ton cutoff, so the histogram is a lot more stable. The other one at no cutoff was ridiculously huge variance, and that's because people were classified blocks of waste as having some validity. And so here we've less variance, but a huge amount of variance. So on the right-hand side, we have Barrick's classification. So the green is indicated and the blue is inferred. And so reserves are this green line, essentially reserve equivalent for Barrick. And if we look at just these 2 examples, the very short example, their reserves would be less than 1/3 of what Barrick had. And the one right next to it has more than double just in measured resources and almost triple in terms of measured plus indicated. So a huge amount of variability in the results of the classification. And so we're going to go into a little bit of classification theory. So the CIM, which is the Canadian Institute of Mining, they're the group that provides the definitions for mineral resources and mineral reserves for the Canadian Code, which is NI 43-101. But the definitions are very similar between JORC and Canada. And for me, these are vague on purpose because we want to let the QP or the competent person be able to use their judgment to make the classification according to their own judgment and their experience. So these are not prescriptive in terms of you need to have this drill spacing to achieve a certain level. So you need to sort of read between the lines and get comfort to what you're doing. And for me, the key phrase in here is under indicated resources, you need sufficient detail to support mine planning. So when I'm looking at a new project, and this is a gold project underground, and these are historic stopes, when I'm looking at a project, and these are drill intersections, I want to decide whether or not I have sufficient information to make a judgment call on mine planning. So pushing a mining drift across laterally here, it costs around $8,000 Aussie per meter of advance. So if I'm going 120 meters, that's $1 million. Do I have enough confidence that with the information that I have, that I'm not going to be embarrassed having made my company spend $1 million to step out to that area? And thinking that way really sort of grounds you in a basis of reality where you have to think like any indicated or measured resources, somebody could go out there and drift out there and mine it. And it's your responsibility to ensure you're sure enough to do that. And we live in, generally speaking, these 2 dimensions. There are many other factors which impact the resource classification, from QA/QC or reasonable prospect of economic retraction. So if you have metallurgical sampling, but generally speaking, we're living in these 2 dimensions. So grade variability and geometric variability. In the upper left corner here, we have porphyry intrusion. So these are my baked potatoes. Again, getting the geometry is fairly easy. And then within that, you have the luxury of doing different types of geostatistics and other methods to infer what the risk on the grade variability within that body. In the lower right here, we have that folded iron formation that I described. These are my curly fries. But the majority of ASX or TSX listed companies are exploring and developing projects in this upper quadrant, which is orogenic or epithermal gold deposits. And these generally have both a geometric and a grade variability component. And some of these are sneakily geometric when they seem to be grade problems. I translated this in potato for your use if you want to calibrate yourself. So last year was the first session, the first conference of the CIM Mineral Resources, Mineral Reserve group. There were several hundred people. It was a great outcome. Great discussions were had there, and I prepared a paper there for mineral classification. So what I wanted to do was compile and compare the classification schemes between operating mines and exploration companies. And this is the result of that work. It was very difficult to do, so I read over 300 technical reports, and very frustrating because the descriptions within those technical reports are very vague, very hard to extract the information of what they intended to do and what they actually did and what mechanisms they used to do. So there was a lot of inference, and I'm sure if somebody less biased than me tried to do this, they might get a slightly different response. But I think this is, given I have 30 examples here, I think it's fairly reliable. And I had to also sort of, it's hard to compare apples with apples. Every deposit is different. So I tried to split it into two different deposit types. So now I'm talking about the Italian boot of the potato slab here. So the most difficult epithermal orogenic gold deposits. And this is the minimum drill space or the maximum drill spacing allowed to achieve indicated resources. And these are for operating mines only. So the most common drill spacing is around 30 meters. With a tail on either side, which is pretty much as expected. If we layer on top of that development projects, so these are projects run by companies that are not operating, we see that the drill spacing is much more broadly defined, and the median is almost double what the median for operating companies. So you might think like, wow, they need twice as much drilling. Well, because of geometry, it's actually they need almost 4 times more drilling to achieve the same median as the operating companies. So my argument, and I still I hold this, is that there's a lot of exploration companies or development companies that have resources that are under drilled, and they're carrying what I call classification debt. Essentially, they're walking around with indicated resources or inferred resources that should have been drilled a lot more to get to that level. And it's extremely difficult for them to walk back and tell their investors, we need to drill 3 times, 4 times more holes to just achieve what we already told you we have. And so they're carrying this classification debt year after year. And the method of or the mechanism of classification, as I described, is also quite difficult to extract from these reports. But in general, the QPs are using the variogram range as one of the methods, and very few people are using this green example, which I called MRE Parker, and he had proposed a method of risk analysis where you do conditional simulations, and then you make periods of time and bin the blocks for those periods and assess the risk on those errors. And a very small proportion of people are actually using that. I think it's increasing. There's not many groups out there that are working on tools to make this easier, more accessible to use. And hopefully they'll also work on the geometric problem that I described, where it's one thing to do geostatistics and figure out the grade variability and risk, but there's also a geometric component, which is really hard to define. And the variogram, again, the variogram is the most commonly used method of estimation, and I argue that this is wrong. And this year, I was very happy to see Dr. Clayton Deutsch from the Center of Computational Geostatistics at U of A published a paper and essentially used very, very logical arguments to show that the variogram range is not a very good method. It should not be used to determine the search radius or the drill hole spacing for classification criteria. I'm not going to go too much more into that, and we can discuss it in the question period after if you would like. A third theme is the domains above cutoff grade. So for me, what I'm looking at the risk, I'm asking the question, how many data points are necessary or sufficient to find the edges of the potentially economic domain? So in this case, I don't need to find the edge of the potato slab. I need to find the edge of the Italian boot of high grade that we see inside of it. So just to give you an example, this is a gold deposit called Veza. We can assume that the block grades are the truth. It's essentially drilled off at 10-meter spacing. And I simplified the color scheme so that red is above the cutoff grade and black is below the cutoff grade. So in this case, I'm showing 2 grams per ton. So this is showing you the domains above cutoff grade. And in general, you have around 200 meters of mineralization that you would consider reporting to resources. But if you increase the cutoff grade, you make it more difficult. The threshold is different. So the areas that you would consider to be above cutoff grade of the domains are now smaller, than closer to 75. And again, if we increase the cutoff grade to 5 grams per ton, now we've shredded it down to 40 meters. So I would argue, and I think it's hard to argue against this, that you would need a tighter drill spacing if you were declaring resources in this scenario versus this scenario, where there is some variability in grade, but generally speaking, there's no geometric problem to find when are you inside and outside this domain that you're going to declare as resources. The problem with applying the variogram as a tool for classification is that it's exactly the same variogram for the 3 cases, so it disqualifies it for adding any information for this scenario. So bringing it back to the potato, here how many drill holes, if you say to yourself, I need 3 drill holes across my domain above cutoff grade, in my first potato slab, I can get away with 5 holes, but when I have domains of ore within domains of waste in that same geology, you're still, within the quartz vein of the thing that you trust and the alteration, everything else, but you only report the stuff that's above cutoff grade. And you'll need a lot more drilling in the case of on the right here. And the fourth theme is you need to limit extrapolation. It seems obvious, but it's critical, especially when we're talking about gold or silver deposits. And the reason is that the distribution of grades within these deposits is log normal, which means you have a super long tail of very high grade, and it's normal to have grades that are 10 times or 100 times or even 1,000 times above your background. And that grade is going to want to spread out like a disease, like we see in the Petri dish on the right. And you need spots of penicillin to sort of hold it back. So if you imagine this splotch up in the center here, if you take out the one hole in the bottom, you take out the single hole, what's going to happen? Well, that orange blob is going to escape and it's going to go right up to the next hole. So you're creating a geometric bias because of this grade distribution that's overwhelming the signal and taking up more space than it would. It doesn't go halfway, it goes more than halfway. So the less drilling you have, the more classification risk you have. And this is one of the most uncomfortable sentences I read in a technical report. All other blocks were assigned an inferred indication with no specific limit described on where, how far the blocks allowed to classify to inferred or other categories were described. So let's go back to the Parker challenge classification. What did we do? So one of the tools we used is conditional simulation. So this is a geostatistical method that provides multiple versions of geologically reasonable grade distribution. So I won't go through the process, but suffice it to say that the variogram describes the distribution or the normal variance, and we can convert the data into blocks. And the sequential part of sequential Gaussian simulations ensures that you have a grade distribution and patches of those domains respect what we would expect in a natural deposit type. But we end up with, and in our case, we used 136 separate simulations because that's where it started stabilizing. And we have 136 grade bins. So in the table of block model, we have 136 columns of different gold grades. And then we took those gold grades and we simplified, we used a very simple measure of what the risk is around that. We used the coefficient of variance, which is basically the standard deviation divided by the average. And that is our simple attempt at sort of simplifying the data so we can compare high-grade blocks with low-grade blocks and get a simple version of what the error could be as we get away from drill holes. And the result was expected, but also unexpected. At first, when we looked at it, we expected that the grades of the blocks within the high-grade domains were going to be much more variable. But in fact, Lucy and I did such a good job in our nested mineralized intervals and our solids that we basically these solids were super clean and this deposit is unusual in my opinion in terms of the continuity of these high-grade domains and how continuous they were with almost no waste integrated into them. And so the variance within those areas were very low. But we could use these conditional simulations to see how the error or how the risk increased as you get away from a drill hole. So how far do you need to go from a point of information before the risk increase? And usually there's a little bit of a step as you step away. So for the highest grade domains, that wasn't very useful, but for the lower grade domains, we were able to make some assumptions and gain some knowledge from that exercise. The other thing we did, and this was particularly useful or important for the cigar-shaped or French fry-shaped deposits, is look at simple geometry. What is the diameter or the cross-sectional area of the shortest length? And it goes back to my geometric problem is how many drill holes do I need across this thing to minimize my error? And you can see even here, and the instructions were for the Parker challenge were to don't worry about the grade, classify it as if everything is above cutoff grade, but in a real world scenario, this would be important to me. If we were applying a higher grade cutoff, then I would require higher drill spacing than if I was classifying this type of deposit. And this is the result. So we have a mix of measured, indicated, inferred. We did classify some inferred outside of the domain. So the green line is the edge of the ore domains. And those were on fairly strict circumstances. So it had to be above a certain grade. The capping was quite savage outside of the domain. So it needed to be, it was capped very savagely. It was above the cutoff grade, and you still needed tighter drill spacing to achieve even inferred resources. We also declared to disclose the resulting drill spacing. So for each classification, we give the drill spacing, and in the new proposed NI 43-101, there is a recommended change to have this type of these types of graphs, or at least declare the statistics of the drill spacing, and there's some debates ongoing on whether or not that's useful. I argue this is critical for people like me who are heavy consumers of technical reports and trying to extract the risk from these deposits, but also for QPs and CPs to have benchmarking available to them to make educated decisions based on operating lines that have gone through reconciliation, that are adjusted and calibrated to what drill spacing is appropriate for their deposit style. So some maybe controversial conclusions. Variograms are not appropriate for classification. Number two, gold deposits by their nature, due to the log normal distribution, manufactures higher tonnage and grade with wider drill spacing. I think people assume that you win some and you lose some, and it kind of comes out in the laundry, like it's going to be okay, like you're going to gain somewhere. But in general, from my experience, that's not true. Because of the log normal distribution, you kind of spread out to the edges of the next nearest hole, and you're creating this geometry of grade, which is blown out. So in my experience, almost invariably you add drilling and you reduce you reduce the tonnage and grade of your deposit. Many gold exploration companies are carrying classification debt that should be paid down prior to financing and construction. So over the last 20 years, we've seen over a dozen in Canada alone and many more in Australia, projects that have either failed completely or have underperformed severely in terms of what they promised the market. In many cases, this is chalked up to dilution or mining issues. The last thing that the company wants to admit is that they have a problem with the resource, because you can't change or adapt and fix the resource. If there's a problem with the resource, it's seen as a permanent problem. And I'm convinced that the majority or all of these deposits are under drilled when they're studied, and then they're living with the consequences later. And this is a major problem, and I think people are undervaluing the impact of these disasters and shortcomings. And finally, I think the Parker Challenge should consider a narrower scope for greater participation for future iterations. I think over the last 2 iterations, there's been a few hundred participants download the data and around 20 that actually deliver at the last minute. I think that can be improved. Like the amount of time that Lucy and I spent on this is, pretty much every weekend between the start and the end of this competition. If it was something where the block model was ready and it's an exercise of classification and can be done over a weekend with a short report, I think you would get a better turnover and maybe better discussion and more people participating. So that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. That was awesome. I love your graphics and very impressed with how you put all that together.
I went a little bit crazy on those AI image creation when I started. I just couldn't stop.
They are
Make this
so
man
cool.
make this man happier. Make him walk away and wave me like yeah, had lots of fun.
That was brilliant. Thank you so much for for going through all that with us.